Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Andrew Cooperrider Show. Of course, I'm your host, Andrew Cooperrider. Thank you guys for joining us so very much. And as always, we're bringing you the liberty-minded news here in Kentucky. A couple of items to cover there and a couple of national items as well. We're going to be covering some great stuff. We've got the state has decided to create pollinator habitats on the highways, which, we'll dig into that a bit, but it sounds a lot more like you don't have money for the gas. So, Biden stuff coming back to get you. Inmate escapes prison, kinda. He does escape, but he wasn't exactly in prison. But inmate escapes in Lexington. Joe Biden signs an executive order on abortion. And then New York, following up on our prior conversations about that Supreme Court decision, New York has put in place their next new gun law, which I think will immediately be struck down. But before we dig into it, please like, comment, and share to support us. That's an easy, simple thing for you to do. You sit there, you listen to this all the time, send a link to somebody, hit the share button down there in the bottom corner and say, hey, check this guy out. Leave us a review if you're listening on Apple. As always, too, if you're listening to this on a replay on Facebook or YouTube, feel free to go on to, you can listen to it on the go on all major podcasting platforms, including Spotify, Apple, all the Google podcasts, all the podcast platforms, you can find it there. And thank you guys for joining us. One more thing before we dig into it, please. As many of you know, I'm running for state treasurer here in Kentucky, and that means I need you to donate to the campaign. If you haven't yet, ask yourself why. Why are you unwilling to do so? Even $10 goes a long way. We need to put our money where our mouths are. I know I donate to candidates all the time. You should too as well. It doesn't stop the establishment and the corrupt and all those people from donating to their candidates. But yet we on the Liberty side sometimes have a very hard time getting you guys to actually even give a few bucks, let alone some big money like they get on the other side. And it handicaps us a bit. So please donate today. You can go to Andrew, 4, ky.com. That's Andrew, 4, ky.com. Once again, Andrew, 4, ky.com, and hit the donate button and help that campaign out. And now let's dig into it. So the state has come out recently letting everybody know, this is very recent. I've seen several articles on this over the last week. Now, letting everybody know they're only going to be mowing about 15 feet, and they're going to be doing it less often, 15 feet from the road on the highways. They're going to be doing it less often because they're putting in pollinator habitats. Now, to be fair, the state and nature side has been working on this very thing for a while, where they have occasionally come out and said, look, we're going to be mowing less here or there. We're going to create these pollinator habitats. But most of the time when those announcements take place, they're going to take place earlier on in the year, growth cycles, things like that. Makes more sense. I'm not saying flowers don't grow at this time of the year, not saying pollinators don't grow, but it's not time to do it considering spring is the growing season. And so that leaves one to wonder if it has anything to do with the fact that, well, frankly, the gas prices are really high. Now, for those of you who are unaware how it works here in the state, as far as our budgeting goes, they make a budget. The budget lasts for 2 years, and they make a budget based upon, of course, prior spendings and everything else. So the Kentucky Department of Highways, generally, they're funded by the road tax mainly. The transportation cabinet, is funded by the road tax mainly. They do pull in some general funds. But they make their budgets. Those budgets, like I said, are set by the legislature every 2 years, but it's based upon certain revenue goals and costs. Well, there's been a big change since this budget was made. Let's keep in mind this budget was passed during this last legislative session that ended in mid-April. It was before gas prices really started peaking. And certainly since then, gas prices have gone up a lot. And surely as that budget started being discussed, they didn't know how long the gas prices would last at this high. So they obviously have not budgeted properly for the cost of gas. Now, they're not going to come out and say that, mainly because this is the Bashir administration, and they're not going to come out and say, look, my Democrat buddy Joe Biden, who I love so much, I mean, geez, oh Pete, that guy, they fly to DC all the time. Don't believe me? Check the governor's flight logs. He flies to DC all the time. But anyways, he's like, look, I don't want to put my guy Joe Biden under the bus and say you have to have taller grass on your highways because we're just not going to spend the money on the fuel because we don't have it budgeted to spend that amount of money. Instead, they're going to say, look, it's better for the bees. It's better for everything else. Don't get me wrong. Do not get me wrong here. I am in full support of us mowing less on the highways. In fact, I'm in full support. Just let it grow. Let it grow as high as. Why do we need to cut it down? You know, we can eliminate noise and everything else. We can have I don't have to see your ugly car driving on the other side of the road because I got a tall grass thing in the way. I'm just joking, of course, but. You know, I understand it looks nice here in Kentucky in certain parts, the rolling grass and everything else, but it does save taxpayer funds, and we can wrap it up in some green initiative about it. Pollinator habitats as much as we want to. I'm with you there. Let's call it that to make people happy. But this is, mark my words, the timing and everything else is very suspect to make me believe it's got more to do with the price of gas than it does to do with some sort of pollinator habitat thing. Though it does give me an idea for the next time that I don't feel like cutting the grass and my wife comes and yells at me, I'm just going to say, look, honey, we're building pollinator habitats out there. Now, look, we're doing our part for the environment, for society. It's the right thing to do. The bees will love us. So I'm not going to cut the grass because I care more than you. And then when the HOA comes and tells me I have to cut the grass, I'm going to try the same thing. We'll see how that works out. Say, look, the Kentucky Department of Transportation Transportation Cabinet. It's not a department, it's a cabinet. The Kentucky Transportation Cabinet does it. They don't mow. They're creating pollinator habitats. Why can't I do the same? Seems unfair to me. Once again, double standard, government and me, rules for thee, not for me, right? And so I think I should be allowed to create my own pollinator habitats on my yard. Of course, gas is getting awfully high. It's getting expensive. Getting out there and mowing. But anyway, so as you're driving around on the highways, you notice the grass is getting a little scruffy. You can thank Joe Biden for that one. It's a wonderful work he's doing, of course, for our economy and for the cost of everything. All right, we've got an escaped inmate here in Kentucky, or here in Lexington. An escaped inmate, kind of. So let me tell you a story here. This guy, about 42-ish years old, and he was sentenced in 2020, mid-year 2020, to a 5-year sentence for drug charges. Now, I am no mathematician. Well, actually, I am pretty good at math, but that's only 2 years. He was sentenced to 5, so he had 3 years left. Follow me here. He had 3 years left. Now, I say he kind of escaped from prison, so this wasn't like, you know, a prison break or anything like that. He didn't sneak into prison with a schematics tattooed on his back to save his brother. You know, this wasn't escape from Alcatraz or anything like that. He didn't jump a wall. Don't worry, Masterson Station, we're safe. He didn't jump a wall to get out there. Okay. This is what happened. Apparently, with 3 years left on his sentence, he was staying at the Hope Center here in Lexington. So what's the Hope Center? The Hope Center is a place for men, homeless, recovering addicts, people trying to get back on their feet, generally speaking. They help also with transitioning. They're kind of like a halfway house sometimes. But I didn't know this guy wasn't on parole. He was actually an inmate, escaped inmate. So he wasn't out of prison, but for some reason, his prison was not even Blackburn, which already is a pretty cushy place, I'm told. Never been there, never been inside, but I'm told it's not the worst prison in the world. No, he wasn't in Fayette County Jail either. No, he was at the Hope Center on an anklet. That's what they said. They had an anklet on him and he was there and he was allowed to roam free. So he got sentenced to 5 years, 2 in, and he's at the Hope Center on an anklet. This sounds like he wasn't actually doing anything. It sounds like he wasn't in jail at all. He was at a halfway house before parole. That's the way it looks to me, based upon the detail, because they're not going into deep down in these details for you, because of course that would cause us to actually ask some questions I'm going to ask here in a second. But based upon the details I'm reading, I've read it in 3 or 4 different places. They're scant on it, but they're calling him an inmate. They're not saying he's on parole. They said he was 2 years into a 5-year sentence and he was at the Hope Center on an anklet. Like he stays there. And so he'd slipped the anklet and he ran away. And this just goes to the failures, I believe, of drug court here in Kentucky. Okay, so for those who don't know, drug court's this thing where if you get caught doing a crime, if it's a drug crime, you go pretty much most of the time immediately into drug court. But if it is, let's say you get caught stealing. Let's say you break into somebody's car and you steal something and you get caught. If you get caught and you don't have drugs on you and you have no drug history, you get one punishment, whatever it may be. It's pretty black and white. If you're found guilty, you know, they've got their sentences and stuff, and that's what you do, right? Depending upon your amount of times you've been caught or whatever, doing these things, your criminal history. But if you have no drugs, this is what you get. If you do the same crime, exact same person, commits the same crime, but also has drugs on them. So you would think, well, that's an amplifier because drugs are like illegal too. So not only are you doing this illegal crime like stealing, but you're also on drugs. So that should be like extra, right? You'd be wrong. In fact, and I'm describing this in a very quick and crass way so people understand and grab a hold of this here. But if you're found with drugs and you've been stealing, that triggers you to go into drug court, where instead they're going to treat you for your addiction and treat you in that way and look at the crime as a symptom of your addiction instead of what it is, a crime. And it leaves it up. It takes it from being, if you plead guilty and you go to drug court, it takes it from being in the hands of like a jury, and then a judge sentences you after a jury. And instead you say, I'm waiving my right to a jury, and I'm going to have the judge kind of acts as a quarterback to your treatment and whatever the judge thinks. So maybe you go to jail for a little bit and then they put you into halfway house, like what's going on here at the Hope Center, I'm assuming. And then maybe they put you out there, and that is before you even go on parole. And it could be a longer program. So you could end up going to jail for like, if you just broke in, had no drugs, you could go to jail for like a year, parole for a year, and then you're done. In this case, you may end up 5-6 years through the system, but you didn't have to go to jail for the year. I would say, based upon the results, drug court has been an abject failure, objective failure. And I'm saying that, and please understand what I'm saying. I'm sure there's a lot of people out there that you guys can look at and say they were helped by drug court. They were helped by addiction treatments. We can't give up on these people. I'm not necessarily disagreeing with you there. What I'm saying is this: drug use has gone up. Overdose has gone up. Crime has gone up. Escaped inmates escaping, slipping their anklets, right? I'm saying when you look at the results of the policies, something is not working. And we should take a minute before we keep going down this road and say, hey, is this a place we want to keep going? Do we want to keep doing this where we're treating this differently than we do other crimes because drugs are involved? I think it should give us a lot of pause. And I think we should take a deep dive into our drug court system here in Kentucky. I think this should be a wake-up call that we got a guy who's not even halfway through his sentence. A 5-year sentence. That's a pretty long time. Trust me, that's a long time. I've known people with long rap sheets. They don't get 5 years. And he's able to not even halfway through. He's probably a habitual offender then if he's getting 5 years too. Trust me. haven't seen his background, but I would bet big money this is like his 5th conviction at least. I bet big money it is. But anyways, because 5 years, that's a long time when drugs are involved. I'm just being honest. I've dealt with it. I've seen it. That's a long time. So, but yep, halfway through, not even halfway through, he's out there. He's at the Hope Center. He's on the run now. He's got ties down in Somerset, apparently. So, just something to put on your radar. Something for you to be thinking about, something for you to be asking judges about as you're vetting candidates. For people who it's getting into judge election season. Ask them their thoughts on drug court and see what they have to say. Do they think, oh, it's been a gigantic success? Look at these people who've gotten clean. I'm glad they've gotten clean. Or will they recognize that a tree by the fruit that it bears, and the fruit this is bearing is, yes, there are some people getting clean, but would they get clean regardless if you were not doing these special systems and programs? And more importantly, by not treating that harshly, are you actually creating more offenders, actual victim offenders? And what I mean by that is things like theft and robbery and stealing and assault. Are you actually creating more of those perpetrators by treating them with kid gloves? Are you actually causing a person to do more repeat offenses because you're not being as forceful with them as you could be? Something for you to think about. All right. So on the national level here, Biden issues an executive order about abortion. Now, to remind you guys, a few weeks ago, I talked on a story regarding the health department in Woodford County and how there's an accidental posting by their social media manager. And I started talking about how they have how this just is the tip of the iceberg on taxpayer-funded advocacy. Well, guys, this Joe Biden executive order, let me tell you what it does. First, it encourages and even to some degree, it looks like it's helping fund, which, remember, the Hyde Amendment says that your tax dollars aren't supposed to support abortion. Remember, it used to be an acceptable stance in this country for the left to recognize that while they may be for murdering children, the rest of us are not, and they will at least not take an issue so divisive as abortion is. And by divisive, it's actually not that divisive. Almost 100% of citizens, I believe it's around 80 to 85%, at least support some degree of restraints on child murder, which is good really warms my heart to see that they do feel that way on some of it. They're okay with parts of it, but there is not broad support for abortions past 15 weeks, and 15 weeks is a very long time. That's a while. That's almost 4 months into the pregnancy. That's some time. But regardless, the broad scale support of abortion until past birth is just not there at all across the country. That has not stopped the Biden administration from plowing ahead and ignoring the Hyde Amendment, ignoring any kind of your wishes, and saying, look, I'm going to take your tax funds and I'm going to push abortion. And what's he doing here? Well, he's setting up abortion clinics at state borders. That's right. So if Kentucky borders a liberal state that has different abortion laws, let's take Ohio has some iffy ones, I believe, but it's kind of hard. We're surrounded by a lot of red states, but let's take a state like Kentucky, and let's suppose Ohio allows abortions much later or what have you. Now, right now, there's supposed to be a trigger law. They weren't supposed to be allowed at all in Kentucky, but of course, we've seen the courts deciding that they're going to hash this one out because, legislators can't make laws anymore. That's at least the way that the Kentucky state Supreme Court seems to think. But anyways, so they're going to encourage and help pay for clinics to be set up so those people don't have to drive as far. There's even talk of helping to fund their transportation, which is in and of itself taking your tax dollars to do that. And speaking of funding transportation, what we've also found out is the Biden administration has apparently been paying for the transportation of illegal immigrants to travel across state lines to get abortions. I'm not kidding you. So legal immigrant gets picked up in a state, or where they're being held in a state in their camps or whatever, but they want an abortion. Apparently, apparently, this is just what kind of the news is based upon some words people have said about providing transportation, trying to figure out how to get them there, that the state has been, the government, the federal government has been and is continuing to work on transporting these illegal immigrants across state lines to get abortions, which, I could have swore that it was, I feel like it is illegal to transport illegal immigrants across state lines. Let me check on that real quick. I believe it is. Is it illegal? Yes, a federal law does exist that makes it a crime to transport or attempt to transport a non-citizen within the U.S. Huh? Well, look at that. Yep, it is. It is a law. You can't transport things across state lines. I thought it might be. Wanted to double check. Yes, you cannot transport illegal immigrants across state lines, but apparently rules for thee, once again, not for me being the federal government. And the federal government's saying, look, yes, you can transport illegal immigrants, but if they want to murder a baby, not only will we allow you to transport them, we will do it for you. We'll pay you to do it, right? And we'll pay you to go ahead and take care of that. Now, I'm wondering how many of these people are coming here, and that just goes to show too as well. I mean, generally the Hispanic vote, the Republicans have been taking why out there. They've been picking up a lot of the Hispanic vote, but for some reason, the federal government thinks that they're going to continue to win it by murdering unborn, the Hispanic children, which should be racist. That should be, but whatever. I mean, it's no surprise here. Planned Parenthood was founded with eugenics in mind to specifically try to murder minority children in the womb. That's why it was founded, and to not just murder them in the womb, but to stop minorities from having children, so that way they wouldn't outnumber white people. I mean, that is factual. That is why Planned Parenthood was started. So it doesn't really surprise me that the federal government continues on with these racist policies, but we should probably be fighting this racism as much as possible. Anyways, but yeah, they're transporting these illegal immigrants across state lines. And then there's another thing that they're doing here. They've decided that they're going to use taxpayer funds to educate on abortion. AKA, we're going to take your tax, that's in this executive order, we're going to take your tax dollars and we're going to message on abortion. What does message on abortion mean? Well, it means we don't like this whole Judeo-Christian values that are circulating on abortion as murder and everything. That doesn't sit right with us. So we're going to take your money. That's right. Your money that we took from you at gunpoint. You think they're not taking it from you at gunpoint? Try not paying it and see who shows up. Anyways, we're going to take money from you at gunpoint, and then we're going to use it to pump out propaganda that goes against everything you believe in, because we want to win on this issue. In fact, we're going to use this to fund our own personal liberal Democrat campaign, political campaign. This should be illegal. It's literally taking your funds, your tax dollars, and spending your money and spending it to help them stay in office, get into office, and spending it on these social issues. Once again, taxpayer-funded advocacy. And that's what we were talking about, that health department story here in Kentucky a little while ago. Now we're seeing this. Here's the federal government engaging in propaganda, in taking your money and spending it to push out and pump out messages that goes against your moral fiber and being and everything you stand for. They don't care. They don't see anything wrong with it. If the federal government was using funds to really pump out and push out Christian views, let's say the federal government was pumping out things like, good things, probably that stop this health crisis, this mental health crisis that we're experiencing. And you see it everywhere, these young kids going through mental health crisis, probably because the minute a boy picks up something pink, we start saying he's a girl. But I'm sure that has nothing to do with the mental health crisis going on. I'm sure it has nothing to do with the fact that we locked them in a room for 2 years and didn't allow them to have contact. And then when they did come out of that room, and still in some places, we put a mask on their face because they're dirty little children and they can't be touching stuff, because that certainly doesn't help the self-esteem, does it? But regardless of all that, regardless of that, if the government started pumping out nuclear family values, get married, have some kids. You know, it's funny. I was reading Elon Musk, I guess, apparently secretly had twins. And he was asked, Elon Musk has like 10 kids, something crazy. And that's why he has so many kids. He says the biggest limiter, and this is so true, and you know this as an employer, the biggest limiter in life in company success has been talent, has been labor and talent. And that we need more people, not less. And the fact that we're falling below replacement rate spells disaster for our economy and everything else. And that the world can handle much more. And in fact, if we don't make more kids, the world will end badly. That's what Elon Musk says. But even outside of that, we have our own things like our legalized Ponzi scheme that is Social Security that will fall apart because our replacement rate's so low, on top of the fact that our own economic GDP growth, our entire economic system is based upon an idea, and that idea is that we have growth constantly. We have to have GDP growth constantly. And if we don't grow in GDP, if we have a couple of quarters where we don't grow in GDP, our credit dries up, people love the view of the dollar drops and everything else. And it's built upon a speculation that in the future we will continue to do well. But if replacement rate continues at this level, at least in America, where it's below, it spells economic disaster. They're running into this in China. They've started running into this way before. And I think that'll probably end up being their downfall, if I have to guess, for China, is that they just will not have produced enough children. Anyways, rewinding. The point is imagine the government was pumping out these values. Values are good for society, I think, but values that people disagree with, like get married to a woman if you're a man and have kids. And, you know, it's okay to have a stay-at-home parent. It's okay to homeschool your kids if that's what you want to do. You know, if you should be a part of your kids' education, pumping out these values. Imagine the screeching from the, I mean, they screech just when we say, look, if this state doesn't want to kill babies, they don't kill babies. And if you want to live in a state where you're enjoying infanticide, then go do that. Right. But they're screeching about that, like loudly screeching at the 4th of July parade. They're literally yelling at all the Republicans, some of the most vile and disgusting things. I was afraid to march in that parade I had me, my wife, my son was with me. I was thinking about marching that parade. I was afraid to, because I knew I didn't want my son to have to witness all the vile and terrible things that they would say towards people that think like we do, you know, people who think in a way that for the last thousands of years, most people have thought, but yet we're the bad people. Anyways, once again, digressing. If we were pumping that up, their screeching would be enormous. But yet, we don't do that. That doesn't stop it from doing us to us. And it's because we do not get upset and we do not get angry enough. We do not stand there and stand up for ourselves and say, this is wrong. They have no problem holding protest after protest after protest, demanding fealty from every single government official and demanding they spend money on their pet whatever. But yet we're afraid to ask for simple things like a reduction in the budget to be able to watch out for red flag gun laws and watch out for, instead we have to take what we get and we're told to sit quietly instead of being just as vibrantly loud and supportive of our views. And maybe if we started to, we'd actually make headway in the government, because they are certainly making headway in the government. It'd be more difficult for us because, of course, our beliefs involve around government having less power. Theirs, they want government to have more power. They believe government's a solution. So naturally, those in power are going to flock towards that idea because, of course, it gives them more power, which is what they all want. But we do need to be specific about this, and we need to be on top of it. That's why you should donate, by the way. Once again, not to wrap back around, that's why you should donate to the campaign. Andrew4ky.com/donate. Andrew, number 4ky.com/donate. Okay, last story for you guys here. Gun applications in New York now will have to be accompanied by social media research. So you have to submit your social media accounts. So the backstory here. So Supreme Court recently knocked down a law, a shall issue law in New York, where basically they're saying, look, you cannot make the requirement to own a firearm, express your Second Amendment, to be based upon a subjective standard, like whether or not the government thinks you need it or not. That's very subjective of whoever's deciding in the sheriff's office. Very subjective. Well, in this case, they've decided to just go ahead and say, okay, well, you got to turn your social media accounts and we get to go through it and subjectively decide whether or not you think the right way. That's right. Subjectively decide whether or not you think the right way. Now, we talked about how red flag gun laws are thought crime enforcement, and that's what this is. Thought crime enforcement. You post the wrong thing, you say the wrong thing, you do the wrong thing online, you have the wrong viewpoint that whoever's reviewing your file decides, that's a little iffy. Then in that case, you don't get to express your Second Amendment right. Now, of course, this will be knocked down. I have no doubt about it. Supreme Court will be like, this is not an objective standard. We've said all along, you can put in all the standards you want, but it has to be objective. This is, once again, subjective. You know what you're doing. You know it's going to get knocked down. One, it's for them to complain and cry about. But two, it makes gun control continue to be an issue, which gets Democrats elected. But three, and more importantly, they know that this is unconstitutional. They know this goes against ruling, but they're still going to do it anyways because there are no repercussions for actions. Just like Joe Biden's executive order on abortion. Some of it may have crossed the line. That didn't stop him from doing it. And the Supreme Court is pretty clear that the federal government has no role in abortion, but yet Joe Biden still did it, and nothing will happen to him because of it. Nobody will hold him accountable, just like nobody will hold New York accountable. Yes, the law gets struck down. They'll just continue to make a new law, and it takes private citizens like you and me to sit there and hold them accountable for it because we're not going to have an attorney general that stands up for it. Definitely not in New York, but it's hard to get an attorney general to stand up in general on any of these issues. And on top of that, too, as well, so it takes, just like who forced it to the Supreme Court in the first place, a pair of private citizens and an advocacy group that was funded through donations. Once again, donate to causes and to people, but that was funded through donations that took that to court. That's who even got the ruling in the first place. Now New York comes up with something else, and they're going to have to do it all again. They're going to have citizens apply, get denied, so they can take it to the Supreme Court and say this is not okay. And those people will have to have borderline issues. Trust me, they're going to have borderline issues too to make the best case they can. I know how attorneys think. If it's obvious, if they say something like, there's going to be a revolution here soon, and then they get denied government, they will not take that client. They want a reasonable client that gets denied for some random reason. And that's what they will seek out. And once they find it, they'll then take it to the courts, and it'll take another year or so or 2 years to get knocked down. And meanwhile, these people are afraid to go protect themselves. People will be murdered. People will be killed. People will be dead in the streets because they were unable to protect themselves from the rising crime that we see in all these Democrat cities all across the country, all because they want to look at, in a subjective matter, your social media accounts to determine if you're worthy or not of having a God-given right. God-given right. And you can sit there and say, oh, those dastardly Democrats at it again, but it's Republicans too. Remember, it was a Republican senators, I believe 12, that passed this red flag gun law legislation to create financial incentives for states to put in place red flag gun laws, including one from Kentucky, Senator Mitch McConnell, doing the same thing. That's borderline. It could be close to the same thing. You're literally funding and encouraging those types of laws. Now you could say, look, that's not quite the same. You can make whatever laws. There's no standard. It can be subjective. It's going to have to be. Because I went over this once again, I think in my last podcast, that red flag gun laws have to be subjective one way or another. Unless you're in front of a jury, there's no possible way that it could be. You're going to end up in front of one judge, and they're going to be basing their opinion based upon mental health person, the same mental health people that think the minute that a girl is into wrestling in the mud at a young age or into too masculine of things, they say, well, let's put him on hormones and dress him as a boy and call him Larry instead of Shirley. Those same mental health experts are going to determine whether or not you get to own a firearm with a judge maybe taking their opinion for it at face value. I'll pass on that. I'll pass on these subjective standards that we continue to have for our rights. It's basic. It's simple. If you have a right, to own a firearm. It should only be taken away from you with due process in a jury by your peers. And you should be found guilty of a crime that you are protecting yourself against, not just simply you think the wrong way. But of course, we're going to see more of this. Trust me, we're going to see more of this. We're going to see more of these, especially as we have more of these mass shootings. I put that in quotations because, you know, what do you determine as a mass shooting? Of course, there's mass shootings all the time, but it's gang violence or things like that. So they don't consider that to be the case. But anyways, as we see more of these things where they're like, oh, they were on social media, blah, 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 because we're having a mental health crisis with our kids in America. I said this earlier. So you're going to see more of this, and they're going to say, well, you know, it's the gun's fault and blah, blah, blah. And look, if we could only take away based on their social media accounts, and trust me, your right to own a firearm in more states than just New York will somehow start trying to get tied to your social media accounts and what you're saying on it. And we have to stand against that. We got to fight it everywhere we can. Mark my words, we got to fight it everywhere we can. That's why as state treasurer, I said this, I say this on my website, say it all the time. I will personally ensure that if our tax dollars are spent enforcing unconstitutional gun laws, I will immediately raise the alarm so people are aware of it and so they can hold their elected officials accountable, because it's the right thing to do. So one last plug, please donate at Andrew4ky.com. Please share, subscribe, get this podcast out there. We know several thousand of you listen every single week, but please, let's get thousands more and let's make a difference here in Kentucky. Have a great day.